The issue is, how do people become aware of those many different sources and who controls access to those? Because my concern right now is that social media has consolidated to the point that people are basically using 5 sources, whether it's Facebook, whether it's Blue Sky, whether it's
TikTok.
Instagram, TikTok, because those are all, and this is the critical part, algorithmically driven. What you're seeing and what you're getting is being controlled by somebody else. And that's the biggest threat, because the algorithm is not transparent and it's driving what you see.
Welcome to the East Anchorage Book Club. I'm your host, Andrew Gray. The purpose of this podcast is to tell the stories of Alaskans of interest and importance. Today, our guest is James Brooks, reporter for the Alaska Beacon. James is a longtime Alaska reporter, having previously worked at the Anchorage Daily News, Juneau Empire, Kodiak Mirror, and the Fairbanks Daily News-Miner. Although, as we will learn today, initially more as an editor than as a journalist. He has laid down roots in Juneau, where he and his wife and young daughter live. And he was content in his role as the ADN's chief capital reporter when 3 years ago he embarked on what he describes as an experiment at the Alaska Beacon. The Beacon is an outcropping of the States Newsroom, which is a nonprofit news organization with a goal of combating disinformation in our country's growing news deserts. James and I talk about that organization and what it would take for it to persevere. James Brooks, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Tell us about your early life.
Sure. So I grew up in a military family. My dad was in the Navy, and I was born in Charleston, South Carolina, and he was deployed at sea, and we moved around a lot when I was a kid.
What year were you born?
1985.
1985.
September 13th. So my 40th birthday is coming up.
Yeah, that's a big one.
Yeah, as we're talking, it's about a month off. So I'm looking forward to going to the state fair and seeing Weird Al in concert. So,
To celebrate?
To celebrate. So that's fun. So born in Charleston, South Carolina, moved to Philadelphia, to Jacksonville, Florida, to Newport, Rhode Island, and to Indianapolis, Indiana. My parents split up. I stayed with my mom for half of the year, my dad with half of the year. My mom, who's from Indiana, moved back to Indiana. So that's where I went to grade school or most of grade school and high school, and spent summers, vacations with my dad, wherever he was at the time. And so that's how I grew up, was moving back and forth from place to place, even within a given year.
Did you have siblings?
I do. I have one younger sister who's 2 years younger than I am and is working for the state of Alaska or state of Indiana right now. So doing boards and commissions work there.
And did she follow the same schedule of back and forth as you did?
She did. We did a lot of flying back and forth between Indiana and the East Coast as kids, doing those whole unaccompanied minor flights, just having the flight attendants lead us along and riding on the carts through the airports, that kind of thing. And as a kid, it seems like a great adventure. So, and it still does to me today. I still like to travel.
How old were you when your parents got a divorce?
I want to say 4 or 5.
Oh, so you barely remember when they were together.
Correct. Yeah.
And as somebody who just had a child fairly recently, I don't know if you have thoughts about the difficulties of growing up with divorced parents and how that plays a role in how you think about your relationship and raising a child. But do you have thoughts on that?
I mean, that's a really good question, because I think it does influence the way I think about relationships and the consequences of ending a relationship, that and also entering one in the first place. The commitment to say that once you've signed on to this is an agreement, and it binds not just you, but it has effects on other people too. And you have to be willing to look beyond the immediate to say, what are the effects on other people as well?
Were you resentful about having to go back and forth? And
no, I was too young to realize it for most of the time frame. And I think that because of that shifting back and forth, I didn't have as many deep friendships. I had a number of acquaintances and things like that, but I There were only one or two times that I can remember resenting having to leave. And most of the other parts of the time, it was fun to travel and fun to see new things and explore new things.
Where did you go to college?
Virginia Tech. At the time I graduated from high school, 2003, my dad was living in Northern Virginia at the time, working at the Pentagon, and I could get in-state tuition. And so I was looking as a graduating high school senior for a school that was in the mountains, had a good computer science program, and a good college football team. And because I could get in-state tuition in Virginia, I looked at Virginia Tech. My backup school was Purdue. They didn't meet all the requirements, but I thought I wanted to study computer science. And after the first semester, I realized that wasn't for me. And so I switched to English and history and studied that and graduated in 3.5 years, even losing a semester to computer science. And
was there a particular area of history that you were interested in?
At that time, no. I think as time's gone on, I've become a lot more interested in Alaska history and Alaskana and understanding that and all the twists and turns of that. Because outside Alaska, there's not a great understanding or knowledge about Alaska history. And it has so much to offer in terms of the rest of the world, the rest of North America and Asia.
And at what point did you think journalism was going to be your career?
Yeah, I came into it almost through a back door. As part of my English degree, I specialized in technical writing, editing, layout, and design. And so my first job out of college, I graduated, moved down to the Florida Keys and worked at the Florida Keys Keynoter in Marathon, Florida, which is halfway down the Keys. And I started as a page layout person, graphic designer, and copy editor, and did that for a year. I saw a job opening for Fairbanks, the News-Miner, and took a remote editing test, applied, and got that job. Rod Boyce, who's now at the University of Alaska Fairbanks, hired me. Kelly Bostian was the editor at the time. He's now in Oklahoma. And I've been in Alaska ever since. I always say that I left Florida. It was 70 degrees and sunny. I arrived in Fairbanks. It was January 15th, 2008. It was the first negative 40 day that year. And I was just like, well, this is what Alaska's like. So,
were you specifically looking at job openings in Alaska, or were you just looking?
Yeah, I think I had the attitude that a lot of people who move to Alaska which is that I've always wanted to visit Alaska. I'd rather be paid to visit Alaska than have to pay to visit Alaska. So taking a job up here seemed like the way to get to Alaska and experience it. And for me, it was just the right fit, and it's felt like the right place ever since.
So you applied for this job in Fairbanks and sort of sight unseen, flew up January 2008, minus 40, thought, well, this is just how Alaska is. Larry Persily, whose interview came out today, mentioned that he's been really struggling to hire reporters like the old days, young reporters who come up and commit their lives to covering Alaska. He's had a lot of people, and his experience trying to hire reporters for the Wrangell Sentinel, is that they come up and they get their Alaska adventure and then they move on. And that it's not about the pay, and it's not about the benefits, and it's not about like the quality of life. It's about that they were looking for an Alaska adventure and they satisfied that Alaska adventure and they moved on. But it sounds like that you really knew, sight unseen from Florida, that Alaska was where your future lied.
I think that I came in with that impression that this would be my Alaska adventure, but like a lot of people who have stayed, your mind changes. And for me, I spent 3 years in Fairbanks and then moved to Kodiak to be the editor of the Kodiak newspaper. So instead of moving out of Alaska, after that 3 years, I was ready to move to another place in Alaska because I knew that Alaska is so big, you can move to a different spot in the state, still be in the same state, and satisfy that itch to see something different if you're feeling it.
But you didn't know that when you arrived in Fairbanks because you thought, well, this is just how Alaska is.
Yeah.
And becoming an editor of a newspaper after 3 years, that seems like a pretty big step. Also, I want to be clear, when you first got that job in Fairbanks, you weren't a reporter.
Right. I started out as a copy editor, layout designer. But as time went on, I felt more comfortable and had an itch to write as well. And so I did things that allowed me to write. I went to the Iditarod and wrote about doing the ice golf classic in Nome and what that was like, and golfing alongside a taxi cab driver from Ketchikan, a musher who had scratched from the race with a broken arm, and an oil executive from Anchorage. That was our 4-person team when we did the ice golf classic. I went to Barrow, now Ukteagvik, to watch a football game on the blue turf there soon after it had been installed, and wrote about that. And so I was able to write a little bit, and that got me interested in doing more of it. And then at the time, and still today, the Kodiak newspaper is owned by the Fairbanks newspaper. And they had lost their editor and were looking for a new one. I was getting restless in Fairbanks and applied for and got that job in Kodiak.
So the Fairbanks Daily News-Miner, historically a conservative newspaper.
Yeah, historically, yeah.
And I don't know if you had thoughts about the political leanings of the newspaper when you were there, or if, from your perspective, it didn't matter.
No, I would say no, it didn't matter to me at that time. I was just too low on the hierarchy to care about that. For me, as a page designer, layout designer, the place that showed up the most was whether or not we had the Alaska flag and the American flag next to the newspaper's name in the masthead. And that was an issue that longtime readers of the paper will remember, because it's gone back and forth just because for design considerations, when it used to be that newspapers were a lot wider and printed on wide paper, and then everybody standardized, the paper size shrunk, and it was like, where do we put these flags now that the paper's smaller? Those were the kinds of decisions that I was dealing with.
I assume you were offered the editor job in Kodiak. Was it just because they needed someone right away? You were like 25 years old.
Yeah, they knew what they were getting. Like, I think I would have been 25 or 26. I was interested. I could do all of the work that they needed, because they needed somebody who could lay out pages, take photos, edit, and write and report. And so when I moved down to Kodiak, that's what I did. And it was a lot of work. What it worked out to was 6 days a week, 12 hours a day, because there's only me. At the time, it was just me, another reporter, a sports reporter, and another layout copy editor person.
And were you writing your own stories in Kodiak from the moment you arrived?
Yeah, we were working. It was, and I think still is, a 5-day-a-week paper. I'm not sure.
Wow. So it's not a weekly.
No.
It was a daily.
Yeah.
That's impressive.
So it was a lot of work. And so for me, it was like, okay, we'll go out and cover daily stuff and try and do 1 or 2 stories, each of the reporters a day. And then on the weekends, take lots of pictures from community events and then publish those pictures throughout the week, because people like to know what's going on in their communities. They like to see their friends, families, neighbors, kids in the paper. So even if something's a few days old, you don't want to bury it in the back of the paper. You want to give people themselves on the front page. And with a community newspaper, what I said was, when I came in, was that the name of the paper is the Kodiak Daily Mirror, and a mirror is a reflection of the community. And so we should be focused on what's happening in the town and do as much possible focus in the town, because other than the public radio station and the one commercial station, nobody is reporting what's happening locally. So that needs to be the focus, and we should use as little national news, state news as possible. You can't publish a paper without that, but the number one priority and focus in the front page, ideally, should be entirely local news.
So Kodiak is like 8,000 people?
So city proper is, at city in the immediate area, is like 10,000, 12,000. The archipelago was about 14, 15,000 when I was there. City limits is probably 6 to 8,000, but city limits is actually pretty confined. It's like Fairbanks in that way, where the city is bigger than the city limits.
I'm just struggling to see how you have 5 days worth of news in an area with such a small population.
There's always things happening. I mean, you go to any city council meeting, any borough assembly meeting, school board meeting, there's stories out of there. I mean, everybody has a story to tell on any given day. It's called Sonder, the idea that everybody you meet has as rich and interesting a life as the one that you experience. And
do you believe that?
I do. And so we don't have enough reporters to be able to tell every person's story, but your local newspaper, your local radio station can come closer than anyone else.
I would say I believe that to a certain extent, but I will say that there is some diversity. I'll just say off the top of my head, having done these interviews, Fran Ulmer, that's a life that cannot be captured in a 1-hour podcast interview. Mm-hmm. There are plenty of people where I feel like I can tell their story fairly well in a half hour. So, you know what I mean?
Well, I think that also speaks to your comfort and skill as an interviewer. For some people, you feel familiar and comfortable enough to tell that story in a compressed way, and with other people, you may not feel as comfortable, or there may be nuances that you haven't personally experienced, so you don't feel comfortable eliding those or compressing them.
I had lunch with Libby Bakalar yesterday, One Hot Mess Alaska, which, by the way, having lunch with her and Juneau, it puts me in my place. She is a celebrity.
She is.
Juneau people come up and talk to her. She has to shake hands. She's it's such a...
If she ever decided she wanted to run for something in Juneau, she would win. I have no doubt.
I asked her about writing a book, and she was talking about having spoken at David Sedaris' last 2 appearances in Juneau, and about David Sedaris' ability to continue to mine his own life to create interesting material. David Sedaris is able to write all these books, and he's taking the same life that we all have and telling it in an interesting way. Mm-hmm. It's not necessarily that he's having more interesting experiences than the rest of us. And she was talking about that she really kind of is a little bit more content focused in terms of she needs something interesting to happen for her to tell the story, that she's not quite like in the David Sedaris category of being able to just make an everyday walk around a building, a New Yorker story.
Yeah, and I think David Sedaris has the knack that Garrison Keillor had of telling ordinary stories in an interesting way. And there was Studs Terkel. I don't know if you're familiar with his writing.
Yeah, Working.
Yeah, and I was thinking of his World War II oral history and his Great Depression one. He had a knack for that as well.
So that was your approach in Kodiak?
Was local focused, local first, local always, as much as possible. But after 3 years of that really burned me out.
For working 12 hours a day, 6 days a week.
Yeah.
I would assume that your hourly rate was extraordinarily low if you were to divide your weekly pay by 72 hours.
Probably, but I was also in my 20s, single, and that was what I did. It was fun. It was interesting. I saw everything from rocket launches to a crashed oil rig, because that was when the Kodiak ran aground. I saw crime. I saw elections. You really see a lot. Fisheries.
What were your parents' politics? Did they influence you?
I grew up in a Republican family. My grandfather was a county commissioner, the equivalent of a borough assemblyman in small town Indiana. And
your mom's dad?
Yeah, my mom's dad. And then I don't think I asked my other grandparents about politics, and I don't think I engaged with them at the time of that. Even as late as Kodiak, I was saying, I'm not interested in politics, which is ironic because that becomes my bread and butter of coverage. But I was so focused on local city assembly happenings, local government happenings, similar to what the Matsu Sentinel is doing now, more focused on government and not as much as politics at that point. And at that point in my life.
You mentioned that you didn't ask your paternal grandparents what their politics were. What about your parents? Did they talk about politics?
I didn't talk with them about politics, not until I was an adult, really. Not until I had left home. And we grew up Catholic, and so we inherited that perspective. My mom had an abortion stops a beating heart bumper sticker on our car. I do remember that. But beyond that, I don't remember discussing it.
Are you Catholic?
Lapsed, I would say. Yeah, how I would say it is I grew up Catholic.
So you moved from Kodiak to Juneau in 2014. And what drove that move?
So I had a friend who was at the public radio station in Kodiak, and she moved to Juneau to work at the Empire. And she said, "You should come here as well." She said, it's great. And I really struggled with that decision because I liked Kodiak. I was prepared to live the rest of my life there and keep on doing what I'm doing. I cried when I boarded the Tustamina and left for Homer on the first leg of the trip eastward because I wasn't sure if it was the right thing to do. But in hindsight, I'm glad I did.
I guess if it was so hard to leave, why did you leave?
Because I was single. I had no prospects of advancing or growing. I felt like I could stay there and become rooted and not grow any further, and it would be okay. But I'd always ask myself, what if I stayed? And so it's one of those things where if you have an opportunity, sometimes you need to take it.
So you land in Juneau to take a job as just a reporter at the Empire? Or?
So I was editor of the Capital City Weekly at the time. That was the arts and entertainment publication and also weekly regional coverage of Southeast Alaska. So we would do arts, entertainment, cultural focused writing on things happening throughout the region, book reviews, restaurant coverage, festivals, things like that, and explain what was happening in Southeast Alaska.
I would imagine that somebody who is from the lower 48 and had spent a little bit of time in Fairbanks and a little bit of time in Kodiak, you can't really just land in Juneau and start covering the art scene for all of Southeast Alaska.
Right.
Did someone mentor you? Like, was someone showing you how to do that?
Yeah, thankfully, there were reporters and people who were actually doing the reporting. So I was mainly assigning people and doing copy editing and layout and design. So
learning as you go, like from their work.
Exactly. And the weekly was underneath the Empire. So there was all of the Empire staff to learn from as well.
So in my interview with Larry Pursley, he mentioned that when he was at the Empire, there were 16 staff.
Mm-hmm.
And he says that today it's like down to 2.
I mean, it might be 0 at this point because everybody at the Empire switched over to the Juneau Independent. Mm-hmm. So
how many were there in 2014?
I would say 8. Yeah.
Okay, so
8.
Half of the height when Larry was there,
yeah.
But a lot more than 0.
Yeah, and you can almost track the Empire's change over time by the way its name changed, because it started as the Daily Alaska Empire, and then it became the Southeast Alaska Empire, and now it's the Juneau Empire, and it's almost shrinking horizons along the way.
So, listening to your story now, when you got here in Juneau, you were kind of back to more of the editor role.
Yeah.
But at what point did you become a reporter? Because I think of you as a full-time reporter.
Right. I phased away from editing the more that I realized that what I liked was learning and then sharing what I know. I like knowing the inner workings, how something's working, have knowledge of a thing, and then being able to share that with somebody so that they're better informed and being able to use that knowledge for however they want. That's why I'm a reporter. And I enjoy doing that in private life. I enjoy doing it as my job because the better informed somebody is, the better off they are. They can do whatever with that knowledge, but as long as they have it, it's a tool for them.
Okay, so you have this realization that you like learning and you like sharing that knowledge. Mm-hmm. How do you become a reporter when your resume is more of editor?
Yeah, so I had enough background as a reporter, enough writing skills, enough experience to make the shift over into a full-time reporter role, because it's not usual to go from being an editor to being a reporter. But I asked to do that because I knew that's what I wanted to do.
At the Empire?
At the Empire, because eventually we know that turnover on reporters is high, and eventually the state reporter position opened up, and I switched into that.
The stereotype that I have in my head is that folks with the title editor make more than folks with the title reporter. Was that not true? And was there a pay cut involved in
That's a good question. I don't remember.
But yeah, so obviously there's reporter jobs that are available. You're on scene, you're living here. That should be an enormous leg up. When I interviewed Tom Hewitt, who was the opinions page editor at the ADN, he talked about how readers in Alaska need to give folks a break because so much of the reporting they're reading is from folks who just got here, who are young, who are new at the job. And of course, they don't have a lifelong background knowledge in Alaska. And, you're going to be disappointed in some of the coverage because we're not growing our own reporters and we can't afford experienced journalists. I don't know if you could speak to any of that and how, obviously that wasn't you because you had years of Alaska behind you when you became a full-time reporter at the Empire.
See, I don't know if I'd agree with that perspective is because you want to have high expectations. You want to have high standards, maybe is a better way to put it. You want people to know as much as possible. I know I lean on people who have a lot more experience than I do and a lot more knowledge than I do. For covering the legislature and having historical knowledge, somebody like Chris Clark, I don't know if you know him or not, former staffer, still here in Juneau, but just a wealth of knowledge and somebody with the historical background who I'd go to frequently. He's not in the building anymore, so I don't do it as much. But yeah, there's plenty of current and former staffers who I would ask for historical context because I know that they've been around for 25, 30 years and may have seen something similar to what's happening now.
So you started covering state politics in 2016?
Yeah, I'd say that's a good time frame.
So Bill Walker was governor?
Yeah, I was at the tail end of Parnell. I did some stuff with him, but it was mainly Walker when I did it full-time state coverage. And then I was with the Empire, and my goal was always to get to the Daily News because it's the largest paper in the state. It's the most prestigious. It's the source that people traditionally go to when they want coverage of the state. And so that had always been my ultimate goal. And I was able to do that in 2018.
So 2018, you moved over to the ADN. They offered it to you, or were you?
I applied for it.
Got it.
So,
and this is my own stereotype, like that folks who work for the ADN probably live in Anchorage and they come to Juneau for session and then they go back to Anchorage. I don't know the history of that. Has the ADN always had a full-time year-round Juneau-based reporter?
That's a good question. I don't know. But for me, I had been living in Juneau, stayed in Juneau when I was hired with the ADN. And then after I left, they still had a Juneau person, and they may still have one once they hire a new person to replace Sean McGuire.
And when you first started covering the building, what would you say, having done it, I guess, now for almost 10 years, what are the lessons learned about covering state politics that you wish you knew then?
I wish I'd had the knowledge of what was to come and ask better questions based on like what we know, how things have developed over time. I wish I had the connections and background and knowledge. But other than having that hindsight and connections, no, because you take things day by day, you learn over time, and like you can't let the moment be colored too much by what's happened before and what's happened after. I mean, context is important, but you shouldn't let it color what's actually happening because it might be something new. So don't be cynical about it.
I guess I'll ask the question in a different way. Sean McGuire has left the ADN.
Mm-hmm.
He was their Juneau-based reporter. They're going to likely hire somebody to replace them.
Yeah.
What would be your advice to that new reporter about covering the Capitol, if it's somebody who hasn't stepped foot in the Capitol before?
Yeah. Be friendly, but not friends. Be available, but not subservient. Listen to what people have to say. Make sure you seek out different perspectives, and talk to people you wouldn't. It's what they call always do another interview. Go one interview more than what you think you have. Because sometimes you'll think you'll have a story, but if you talk to just one more person, you'll get another perspective on it.
Can you talk about an example from the past where you thought you had a story and you did one extra interview and it reframed the story?
Yeah, like something I'm working on right now, for example, is I'm looking at the Alaska Division of Elections response to the Trump Department of Justice's request for voter information. I got a copy of the response on Monday and read through it. Okay, they've shared some numbers that show the number of registered voters in the state going down. And so we set up an interview to talk to Division of Elections and say, oh, why is this going down? But 5 minutes before the interview, I go and look at the division's own published monthly reports that show something completely different. And so it's about like, keep on looking for another source, another person, and try and explain something else. Always talk to members of the minority because they're the most likely to say it as it is without spin, because as the saying goes, if you have the votes, vote. If you don't have the votes, talk. And so members of the minority will be the most plain spoken typically because they don't have anything to lose.
It's interesting you brought that up. I held a hearing of the judiciary in June in Anchorage about the ICE detainees that were being held at the Anchorage Correctional Complex. And I made a decision at the start of that hearing to give the deportation numbers for the presidents from Ronald Reagan through Biden.
Yeah,
basically showing that Trump hasn't deported that many people. That's not what you would think by watching the news every day.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to put that out there. You know, in my interview with Mara Kimmel, the president of the Alaska ACLU, she points out that if you care about immigration, President Biden was absolutely not your friend.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the reason I bring that up in the context of what you just said is that I feel like the media has been, I almost want to say, like a partner with the Trump administration in terms of creating so much news about Trump's tough on immigrants rhetoric, when by the numbers, Obama, the deporter in chief, I mean, that's how he got labeled. He deported a lot of people, not as many as George W. Bush, who was not as many as Bill Clinton. But I guess...
Do you think it's a big deal? The deportation issue?
What I'll say is, yeah, I do. But it was clear. But let me just say something, James. It was a really big deal during Biden's term. It was a really big deal in Obama's. Okay. And we didn't cover it. We didn't cover it. And so the thing is like these, there are heartbreaking stories being told about folks who've been there since they were 4 years old and are now finding themselves locked up and they can't speak to their children or to their spouse or to their parents. We're telling these stories and they're heartbreaking. And I'm glad that we did the hearing, and I'm glad the ICE detainees were taken out of Alaska because Alaska didn't know what it was doing. It was quite clear from the hearing that DOC was clueless that this was a different population of folks that needed to be treated differently. But I think we could have done the same stories under the previous president.
If it's a big deal, why haven't you proposed legislation about it? I mean, you could propose a bill that says state funds will not be used to cooperate with ICE. You could pass or propose a bill that says state agencies are not able to conduct these sorts of contracts.
Well, I'm glad you asked that question, because that's a discussion that happens in my office a lot. And I think for me, I have a finite bandwidth of what I can do.
Mm-hmm.
And it matters, for me, if I've got several big priorities in the office, and I know that the governor will sign this one, and the governor will absolutely veto this one, and there's just no way if I think about what you've just proposed, some sort of limit with regards to ICE, the governor's not going to sign that bill. And the minorities there's going to be no crossover in my political calculation, no crossover in that regard. It will be caucus line votes, and maybe not even caucus line votes, because we do have Republicans in the majority caucus. There are certain issues that we don't bring up or talk about because they are Republicans. And in spite of the way they might be covered by certain publications, they are Republicans, and they will toe the party line in certain cases, particularly with immigration. So the bottom line is I don't believe that I have a pathway to limit that power. So it would be a waste of my office's resources, both time, energy, loss of sleep, to pursue that path.
And the reason I ask that is because it's a partial answer to your question. If people are not proposing counter viewpoints, counter arguments to what's happening or what an administration or what a political official is saying, that's the story. There's no opposing viewpoint. And you've explained why there's not an opposing viewpoint on this. Because people don't feel that there's the support for it, and thus, therefore, what's happening is correct.
I'm going to say this out loud. If Kamala Harris had been president, it would be worse. And the difference would be I don't think we'd be covering it in the same way. And I don't think that Democrats would be paying attention to it in the same way. And we would have the same heartbreaking stories, but they'd be going uncovered. Yeah, it's an unusual time.
And I don't want to leave your question entirely unanswered as well. I mean, that was a partial answer. The other half of it is you said the media. And I don't think you can say the media any more than you can say the government, the legislature has one view on something or one perspective on something. Because as you had said, even if you're not voicing it, there's different perspectives out there. You have a different perspective than the Trump administration, I'm assuming, on this.
Although in that hearing, I quoted from the Trump documents.
You did.
The Trump documents were what DOC was violating. And there was a lot of drama in Must Read Alaska that I was using the wrong Trump document, which I just find hilarious, that the only fault they could find with me was that I was using the wrong Trump document. Now, see, you've got me giving my spin and doing my thing. I have to cut all this out so the only person talking is you. So you become a full-time reporter covering the Capitol.
Yeah.
And was it what you'd hoped it would be?
Yes.
What was the best part?
Yeah, I think it's like the song from Hamilton, the musical, being in the room where it happens. And it's fascinating to see how things work and having the privilege to see how things actually come together, or more often than not, fail to come together. Because it's a lot easier to kill an idea, kill a bill, or derail something than it is to get it across the finish line. And that's something I don't think I fully understood or comprehended before watching it in action. It's also been fascinating to learn and see both the advantages and disadvantages of coalition government versus having a legislative trifecta.
Like all Republicans in charge of the Senate, House, and the executive branch.
Yeah, because I was able to see some of that under Parnell, and it provided an interesting contrast as well. And so it's been interesting to see that, and also how the problems that Alaska deals with tend to be perpetual and recurring. That
PFD, oil and gas revenue.
Yes.
Like those would be two big ones.
Mm-hmm. And projects as well that continue to kick around.
So Sitnawatana Dam.
Kinnick Bridge, Juneau Road, gas pipeline. These are all things that have been talked about for decades and will continue to be talked about.
It's interesting because in the Larry Pursley interview, he talked about covering the Tongass land use for 50 years since he arrived in 1976. And he says, I never want to write about Tongass land use again. Like, it's just like, I have nothing more to say. I have no more bandwidth. Please.
Yeah, roadless rule. I mean, that's something people have built careers around. The biggest industry has been out of the Tongass has been the attorney industry, the law industry.
Did you meet your wife in Juneau?
I did, which is why I had said that I don't regret moving to Juneau.
How did y'all meet?
So at the time, she was a staffer, and then I put off her
Who was she staffing
advances. For? She had worked for Mia Costello. She had worked for Sam Keto, and I think House Records or Senate Records as well. So she had a pretty varied career. And then I don't think we dated until she was out of the Capitol, because it's funny how she describes how I was completely unwilling to date because I didn't think it would be ethical. And so then she moved into tourism.
It wouldn't be ethical for you as a journalist to date a partisan staff member.
Yes. And so she moved into tourism. And so we started dating at that point in earnest.
But you guys had interest in each other at the point where you felt it was unethical.
First encountered each other, I would say, in the Capitol. Yeah.
Well, what was the first encounter like? I mean, how did that happen?
She noticed me more than I noticed her. When she asked me out on a date, I didn't know it was a date.
So you thought it was like to give you information as a reporter?
Exactly. And so she likes to tell that story. And then she asked me out on a second date, and I was like, I don't know about this. And then after session, she asked me out again, and I said, yeah. And her response was, I need more than yeah. And so we said yes, and then started dating from that point.
Is she born and raised Juneau?
No, born and raised Utah, and then came up for a tourism job, worked in the legislature during the off season of tourism, and then went back to tourism.
Was she raised Mormon?
Yes.
How old is your daughter?
She is 20 months as of today.
Are you? Sorry, what are you doing about religion with your daughter?
We're going to let her choose.
Does your wife work full time?
She does. She's starting up her own tour company now.
So something that has come up doing this series of interviews is the value of reporters being in a two-income household.
I've heard that a lot, but actually it's the other way around right now because she's starting her own business. She's still in the startup phase.
You're the breadwinner.
Yeah, which is
awkward. Or the reliable income.
Yeah, which is, I'd say the reliable income, which is awkward because it's the inversion of the usual thing.
Mm-hmm. That brings us to your current employer. I assume that moving to the Alaska Beacon was a pay increase?
It was. And that was just like moving from Kodiak to Juneau was a really hard decision because I liked what I was doing at the Daily News. I knew it was the
most prestigious job that you were going to get here in Alaska.
Yeah, and broadest audience. And most impactful, because when the ADN tends to write about something, it gets attention, and that means a lot. And so that's why you tend to be a journalist, is because you want people to have good information and them to be able to use that information. And so switching to the Beacon I viewed it as an experiment because of what the ADN had gone through with Alaska Dispatch and that history.
What year exactly did you start at the ADN?
2018, after
the Binkleys had bought the paper.
Yes. Yeah. And so I had viewed all of that business from afar. And when the Beacon came up, they contacted me. The national founders contacted me and asked if I was interested in being an editor. I said no. And so that went away. And then Andrew was hired as the editor and approached me and said, "Hey, I'm doing hiring. I'd love to have you." And I gave him what I thought was a very high salary figure and said, "This is what it would take." And he went away and then came back and said, "Yes, we can do it." And then I went back to the ADN and said, "Hey, I have this offer. You don't need to match it. Can you approach?" And especially the benefits, the leave time was attractive. And they weren't able to match it or get close enough to it that I thought I could pass it up. And so I went to the Beacon because of that. And my expectation was that this would be an experiment. If it lasted 2 years, I would consider it a successful experiment and worthwhile. And now it's been 3 years and running. So I can say that, yes, it's been worthwhile.
You mentioned the leave. It sounds like that your quality of life improved, not only your pay, but your quality of life improved.
Very much, very much. And my wife says that she's noticed a noticeable difference and has really appreciated it.
I guess, can you talk a little bit about what were your benefits at the ADN in terms of the amount of leave that you had and the expectation about the number of stories and how it's different at the Beacon?
I would say that the expectations I place on myself are different because the Beacon is a primarily online publication. It's much more focused because the ADN is something closer to a newspaper of record, that if something happens in the state, the ADN should have a story about it. That's how I felt. That was not the instructions I was getting from my editor or from anyone else, but that was the obligation I felt placed on myself. So I put a lot of pressure on myself at the ADN to not just cover everything and cover it well. But at the Beacon, I can focus on local government and politics, and there's much less of a daily deadline stress. The idea that if I don't get something done on a given day, I don't need to work long hours to finish it today. I can come back at it and hit it tomorrow.
So I did a little bit of review of the States Newsroom. Is that the name of that?
That's the national organization, yes.
And their founding and their focus on state government. And when I interviewed Ryan Binkley, the owner of the ADN, he mentioned that the States Newsroom, from his understanding, has funding from the left, is how he described it. He also qualified by saying that he believes the Alaska Beacon has been objective, that you don't see any sort of bias there. They're calling balls and strikes as they see them. But I think my curiosity has been piqued because, from my non-expert view, I basically see 3 or 4 reporters at the Beacon.
Yeah, we have 3 reporters and 1 editor.
And 3 stories a day, roughly.
So the goal is to have 4 posts for things per week per reporter. And I mean, that's flexible. If you're working on a big story that's like something that takes a lot of time, what we call an enterprise story, I mean, that's fine. But that's the general target. And a post can be something short. Like I just wrote something yesterday that was short, acknowledging the governor's recent skin cancer surgery. It's something that I feel should be noted and is newsworthy, but it's not something that's particularly controversial, unusual, because he's had 2 similar surgeries before.
It doesn't require getting that extra interview. To flesh out the point I'm making, you're getting paid more, you're getting better benefits, and you're working less hours per week.
And I hope that the quality of the reporting hasn't changed and that people still see the value in it. Because the thing with the Beacon, what makes it different is that it's donation funded rather than advertising funded. So like our future depends on giving good results to people who read us. If people find us valuable and donate to us, we'll be around. And if they don't, we won't.
Well, it's like a public utility in a certain way that the goal is not for you to generate a profit. It's to provide a service. And I'm contrasting that with the interview with Ryan Binkley talking about this as a business. The ADN must make $1 more per year than it spends. And that requires him to make objective decisions about the finances of the paper that mean that he can't pay more. He can't offer certain things. You know, he has to be sort of a ruthless businessman to make it pencil out. And that the Beacon functions differently. And I don't want to say it's like dark money, but I've gone to the meetings and I just can't believe that on Alaska-based donations alone, that you guys are able to offer what you're offering the reporters, that it is coming from outside. And I'm grateful. I'm so grateful that the Beacon's here. I'm grateful that you're present in the building. But I do have curiosity about where the money is coming from, and B, about what the assurance is that that money that's really the engine behind providing what you provide, how many years is it going to be there? You've got some millionaires in the lower 48 who are subsidizing Alaska's news coverage. And at some point they could say like, well, hey, we're running short on millions. We're going to direct it to Arizona. We're going to direct it to Florida. We're going to direct it to Kentucky. We're not going to direct it to Alaska.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there, but I'll take it in reverse order. You're absolutely right. There is no guarantee, which is why when I went into this, I viewed it as an experiment. Right now, the Beacon is about 20% funded through donations within Alaska, 80% still from national donors. The list of national donors above $500 each is available on the States Newsroom website. If you look at that,
I'll drop a link in the show notes.
Yeah, you can go and find that list somewhere. Let's see what else. The 80-20 split is switching to more in-state, thanks to the fact that people have found us valuable. People are willing to donate, and the more they donate, the more stable it becomes in the long term, the less experimental it becomes. And that's the hope, is that if we can flip that 80-20 split, we can get to a point where it's sustainable. It can keep going regardless of what national funders think. And that's what I'd love to see myself, because I'd love to have a job where I can keep doing this for a long time.
Can you just speak a little bit about the place of bloggers and news coverage in Alaska, such as Matt Buxton, Jeff Landfield, Suzanne Downing at Must Read Alaska?
Yeah, and the Watchman, for that matter.
And the Watchman, Joel Davidson, editor-in-chief of the Alaska Watchman.
Yeah, what I always say is that the more people watching the legislature, the better it functions. It doesn't matter whether it's a blogger, somebody writing for a newspaper, somebody reporting for a TV station or radio station, or somebody writing public comments from home. The more people watching what the legislature does, commenting on it and observing it, because so much happens in this building that gets seen by only one or two eyes. And just like when you're editing a story, the more eyes on a story, the better it's going to turn out. The
more eyes, the better. I will contrast some of that coverage with something that you were talking about earlier about doing one extra interview than you think you need. I know for a fact, because it's happened to me, stories coming out about a bill that I brought forward or a hearing that I've held, where there was no interview request at all to better understand what my bill seeks to achieve, what the purpose of the hearing was. It's a story that appears to me to be based solely off of the writer's personal beliefs and what they saw on Gavel to Gavel, and no seeking of comment from the players involved at all. So I question whether that is valuable. I think sometimes it's harm, actually, because it can actually spread misinformation and it can be completely untrue in certain instances.
Okay. Is there a question?
Well, the question is it valuable to have bloggers writing untrue stories? There were additional eyes on that hearing. I mean, I guess what I'm saying is, like, you're saying that there's value the more eyes that we have, and I'm saying, well, there's not value when the more eyes are not doing factual reporting, when they're not doing the work that a traditional reporter would do, when they're not held to a standard of being fact-based, they're not held to a standard of having sources for their reporting.
Okay. I see what your question is now. For me, it's useful because it can bring attention to something that I may not be aware of. And it allows me to go and learn more about it. And that's how I find the use in that kind of thing. Now, you're right that it can create more noise to the signal, because I think you see that especially on inauthentic content, bot-driven content, particularly on Twitter, now X, where 3/4 of that traffic is bot-driven, and we know that there's a lot of inauthentic content coming particularly from international governments, even on things as small as Alaska's scale, and even on things as small as city and borough level scale. We know that there are foreign governments that operate inauthentic accounts on social media to drive discord and disrupt local politics and state politics in order to destabilize the United States. I mean, it sounds like a conspiracy theory, but it's actually happening, unfortunately. And so it's incumbent then on Alaskans, on Americans, to know that, to be able to discern what's true from what's not, what's reliable from what's not, and to get things from reliable sources.
I think you quoted, we had coffee yesterday, and you quoted some numbers about where Alaskans get their news.
Yes.
Can you speak about that?
So Data for Progress, a polling firm that traditionally works with progressive causes, released some polling figures ahead of last week's override vote. And among the things they asked was, where do Alaskans get their news? And the number one source was local radio, including public radio, followed by local newspapers, and then local TV. Those were the top three sources. And I don't remember the rest of the results after that. But
well, you said that about 26% got their news from Must Read Alaska.
I think it was in the 20s.
In the 20s. Does that qualify as local?
I would say it qualifies as local. I
mean,
wouldn't qualify it as a newspaper, but I would qualify it as local news.
Right.
Or at least local commentary.
So Larry Pursley, owner and publisher of the Wrangell Sentinel, has a pessimistic view, just simply stating that he's not sure that newspapers are going to survive because it's just not how people get their news anymore. And to continue to sort of fight that truth is kind of pushing the boulder up the mountain.
Yeah, and I wonder, I don't know the context of Larry's comment, but if he was thinking of the paper part of the newspaper or if he was thinking more broadly or not. But I do think newspapers will continue to exist in some form or another. And I think the ADN is still the best source for Alaska news. I think the example I'm trying to follow is Ira Samuels. I think she has the best coverage in the state right now. And I think that's a fantastic work. I think what we'll see is more fragmented, lots of different smaller sources rather than a handful of big sources of news information. The issue is, how do people become aware of those many different sources and who controls access to those? Because my concern right now is that social media has consolidated to the point that people are basically using 5 sources again, that the news information may be coming from many different places, but you're all getting them from just a handful of things, whether it's Facebook, whether it's Blue Sky, whether it's Instagram, TikTok. There's really only a handful of things. And because those are all, and this is the critical part, algorithmically driven, what you're seeing and what you're getting is being controlled by somebody else. And that's the biggest threat, because the algorithm is not transparent and it's driving what you see.
Yeah, I'll tell something, this may seem unrelated, but I'll share it anyway. My office, when we do a social media post, generally posts on X, Blue Sky, Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok. And when the governor held the Sustainable Energy Conference, I attended parts of it. I attended the final speaker. It was Alex Epstein, who is a climate change denier. I think he'd feel comfortable with that label, and really gave this fire and brimstone speech at the end of the conference. And I videoed part with my phone and did a post where I included that clip of him speaking. And what was interesting was how the different social media platforms handled that clip. TikTok deleted it. Not only did TikTok delete it, but they have censored me. And I was getting between 10,000 and 60,000 views on my videos. And now I get 5 to 10 views. And it's kind of interesting because it's clearly some sort of bot or AI driven system, because I was very critical of the clip that I posted. My only belief is that somehow there must have been trigger words in that clip that resulted in me being labeled a source of fake news. I have no idea.
Out of curiosity, if you do disagree with something, why do you platform it and spread it?
I will tell you, because in this case, I did a 30-second clip of what I felt was a particularly egregious commentary coming from Governor Dunleavy's chosen speaker to conclude his conference on sustainable energy. I guess what I hear you saying is that you agree with TikTok. That needed to be deleted, and I needed to be labeled as a source of false news or fake news. But from my perspective, it's like seeing is believing.
I don't agree
You
with
need
that.
to see this. You need to see what the governor is putting forth.
No, that's not what I was saying, and
Okay.
I don't appreciate you characterizing it like that. What I would say is that when I write something that is untrue, I followed the rule, what's called a truth sandwich. I explain what the truth is, explain what somebody said that's untrue, and then make it clear that that is untrue or a lie, and that you always surround incorrect information by the correct information and properly contextualize it. And what I tend to see on social media, and it's not something I agree with, is the policy of just sharing something for outrage, or because what we've discovered over the past few years is that platforming that kind of thing doesn't result in that outcome. People look at the hits, they look at the eyeballs on it. It becomes a more attractive thing for advertisers because they know that even if you're outraged and disagree with something or you support it, what matters to the advertiser is the eyeballs.
Mm-hmm.
And so as a result, that person becomes more attractive to advertisers, and that position then becomes more influential. I don't think that censoring it, like you say TikTok has done, is the right approach, but I do think that you need to contextualize things.
Well, in the attention economy, which I think is a way to phrase it, about getting more eyeballs on your profile, really, because the more eyeballs that you have, the more influence you have. The more influence you have, the more valuable your presence is. And the bottom line is that objective news coverage does not get the number of eyeballs that outrage does. I'll just point out there, having characterized you in a way that you didn't appreciate, I apologize.
That's all right.
But when I posted his clip on X, which of course did not censor me in any way, shape, or form, Alex Epstein himself quote tweeted me and said, "I stand by every word I said," and then got, I don't know, 90,000 views, maybe 100,000 views, which I don't get 100,000 views. So
How many of those were authentic, do you think?
I don't know. I mean, I'm sure there were a lot of bots involved. I mean, I don't know how to quantify that.
Yeah, because we do know during the Super Bowl, for example, independent review found that between 75 and 80% of all traffic on X, Twitter, as it was formerly known, was inauthentic, was bot-driven traffic. There is a theory. At first, it was a joke, and now it's become more serious about. It's called the dead internet theory, that the majority of traffic on social media, especially algorithmically driven social media, is inauthentic and entirely bot driven. That there are very few people actually interacting and seeing specific things. And that if you really want authentic communication, you have to talk to people.
That's interesting. So that is maybe the silver lining there is that social media is dying, and in terms of being the source that we think it is. If you think there's 100,000 views, but really there was only a couple of thousand legitimate views, then that's not quite as concerning.
Yeah, I'd like to think so, but for me, there are social media programs that I don't use because they suppress news content. Like I won't use Twitter X for that reason, because of the bots I mentioned, and because it deliberately throttles news content. Same for Threads, Facebook, and Instagram. I don't use those for work except to read what other politicians are saying. And I won't share stories or information on there usually because of that throttling. I'll use Blue Sky because I know it doesn't. I know the audience is a lot smaller, but it's more authentic. It has a higher percentage of getting authentic views from that.
James Brooks, thanks so much for being on the show today. Is there anything that I didn't ask you about that you were expecting or that you wanted me to ask you about?
Looking ahead, it'll be really interesting to see what happens in the next elections. I think the governor's race is going to be particularly interesting. If you asked me who I thought would win today, I think Bernadette Wilson would win among the candidates who have entered so far.
Why?
She has a strong base of support. She isn't well known outside of that base of support, but those folks are the ones who are the most passionate voters. I also think she's working hard. She's shown that. She's experienced and knows how to campaign. And I think she has the potential to gain a lot of financial support from people outside the state as well. And for all those reasons, I think among the Republican candidates who have announced so far, I'd give her a lot of fairly high odds. We haven't seen any independents or Democrats sign up to run yet. So you're not going to run, right?
I'm not, but I haven't released my interview with Jeff Landfield. He is an independent, and he does say in his interview that he will make the decision whether or not to run. I get so upset because I mean, to me, it's like a Trump supporting independent to me is that doesn't, my brain cannot compute. But
no, I tend to think of Jeff as someone who in the early 2000s would have been labeled a South Park Republican, on the more libertarian Republican side of things, compared to the social conservative Republicanism that is really in charge now.
Do you have a book to recommend to folks?
How depressed do you want to be?
Very.
Okay. The book that I most recently finished it's called Nuclear War, A Scenario. And it is by Annie Jacobson. And if you're ever having a good day and want to read something in the sun, read that, and it'll bring you down to earth real quick.
Well, I've seen it that there are many folks who believe that we are closer to nuclear war today than we ever have been. in spite of the decades of Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union, that actually India and Pakistan, these nuclear powers that are actually engaged in armed conflict, have recent engaged armed conflict that we'd never really seen that before, with nuclear powers engaged in armed conflict. And is that kind of the direction the book is going?
You'll have to read it to find out.
Oh, James, come on. Give a little.
No,
No.
not.
Okay. Well, hey, thanks again for being on the show today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you, listeners. If you like what you heard, please subscribe, rate, and review us. To contact me, email rep.andrew.gray@ahlug.gov or call 907-269-0123.